She was forced into a marriage with a man who could barely look her in the eye, and what she discovered on that silent ranch changed both their destinies forever. Can you imagine being forced to live alongside a stranger who welcomes you as if you were a burden, a punishment he's obligated to endure? But this story happened in the rugged heart of Montana back in April 1918, and what seemed to be a curse turned into something no one could have predicted. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching this story from. Your participation means the world to me and helps me bring you more touching stories like this one. Now let's get into the story that promises to tug at your heartstrings. Evelyn Vance was 26 years old when her life collapsed for the second time. The first had been 3 years prior when her father, a respected rancher in the Bitterroot Valley, lost everything to gambling debts and whiskey. Julian Vance died 6 months later, his heart broken by shame, leaving his only daughter under the guardianship of his older brother, Silas Vance. Evelyn went from being the pampered daughter of a rancher to a charity case in her uncle's house, another mouth to feed, a problem to be solved. Uncle Silas was a man of means, owning vast stretches of land and huge herds of cattle, but he had a short fuse and a rigid view of a woman's place. To him, Evelyn should have been married by 18, as was the custom, and should already be raising children for a husband, instead of costing him money and worry. But Evelyn was different from the local girls. In the times of plenty, her father had allowed her to be tutored by a governess from St. Louis. She could read, write, manage accounts, and worst of all, she had her own opinions on just about everything. In the 3 years under her uncle's roof, Evelyn refused 3 marriage proposals. The first was from a 52-year-old widower with 5 children who needed a housekeeper disguised as a wife. The second came from a leather merchant who drank too much and had a reputation for a heavy hand. The third was from a distant cousin who looked at her with a glint that made her skin crawl with disgust. She said no to all 3, and with each refusal, Silas Vance's face grew redder, his voice deeper, his threats more direct. Then came the scandal. It was a March afternoon at the town market. Evelyn had gone to buy embroidery thread, accompanied by the maid, when she met a drifter passing through the region near the square. He was young, had a different accent. He was from the east, and was leading a pack of mules loaded with goods. Evelyn stopped to look at the fabrics he was selling, and they ended up talking. Nothing untoward, just polite conversation about farming patterns, the differences between the East and the West, the roads he travelled. The maid had wandered off to look at some skillets, and when she returned, she found Evelyn laughing at something the drifter had said. That was enough. In a small town where everyone knew everyone and tongues were sharp, the news spread like wildfire in dry hay. Evelyn Vance, Silas Vance's niece, was seen talking alone with an unknown drifter and laughing to boot. Laughing, a single woman of good standing, conversing with a strange man without a proper chaperone, showing familiarity. The scandal reached Silas's ears before Evelyn even made it back home. He was waiting for her in the parlor, standing, a riding crop in his hand. He didn't strike her, but his glare was worse than any lash. His voice came out low, dangerously low. "You have shamed me," he said. "Shamed this family name that was already dragged through the mud by your drunkard father. I took you in, gave you a roof, food, clothes, and this is how you repay me? Behaving like a woman of the streets?" Evelyn tried to explain that nothing had happened, that it was just an innocent conversation, but her uncle wouldn't hear it. He raised a hand, demanding silence. "It's over," he said. "I'm going to solve this problem once and for all." Evelyn felt the floor drop out from under her. She knew that tone. She knew her uncle had made a decision, and when Silas Vance decided something, no argument could sway him. He continued speaking, looking at her as if she were a stubborn mare that needed breaking. "You're getting married," he announced. "I've already made the arrangements. A week from today, you'll be the wife of Frank Drummond, owner of the Stone Creek Ranch." The name landed in the room like a stone in a well. Evelyn knew that name. Everyone in the territory did. Frank Drummond was the most talked-about widower of recent years, not for his wealth, but for his isolation. He had been married to Amelia, a sweet girl from a traditional family, and 3 years ago she had died in childbirth. The child didn't survive either. Since then, Frank Drummond had shut himself off from the world. He didn't go to socials, didn't receive visitors, worked from sunup to sundown on his ranch, and avoided human contact beyond what was strictly necessary. He was a man of few words and no smiles. Evelyn swallowed hard and tried one last time. "Uncle, please, this man doesn't know me. I don't know him. How can you want me to marry like this without us even speaking?" Silas let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Speaking? You speak too much, that's the problem. Frank doesn't want conversation. He wants a wife to keep his house and put an end to the town gossip. I owe him a favor. He saved my life in a flood 5 years ago. He accepted the marriage because I asked, and you will accept it because I am ordering it. There is no discussion." That night, Evelyn cried in the small room she occupied in her uncle's house. She cried for the freedom she would never have, for the future she had imagined turning to dust, for the destiny being decided without her having any voice. At 26, she was being handed over like livestock to a man who accepted her not out of love, not out of desire, but out of obligation and a traded favor. A double punishment. For her, a penalty for the audacity of laughing in the square. For him, a burden to carry, a mouth to feed, an unwanted presence. The 7 days passed far too quickly. There were no joyful preparations, no farewell parties, no trousseau embroidered with care. Her aunt, Silas's wife, sorted out some of her own old clothes and packed them into a worn leather trunk. Evelyn didn't have the courage to look at her own reflection in the mirror on the morning of the wedding. She put on the grey dress her aunt had chosen, pinned her brown hair into a simple bun, and walked down the stairs with trembling legs. The journey to Stone Creek Ranch took 5 hours by buggy. Uncle Silas sat up front, driving the horses in silence. Evelyn sat in the back, next to her aunt, who also said nothing. The landscape was beautiful. Green pastures stretching as far as the eye could see, tall pines dotting the horizon, the cold April wind carrying the scent of wet earth and wood smoke. But Evelyn couldn't appreciate any of it. Every mile travelled was a mile further from the life she knew, even if that life was one of charity and humiliation. When Stone Creek Ranch appeared on the horizon, Evelyn felt her heart race. The house was large, made of stone and timber, with a pitched roof and a wide porch. Around it, well-kept corrals, organized barns, extensive pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. It was a prosperous property. Anyone could see that. But there was something strange, a feeling Evelyn couldn't name. Maybe it was the silence. There was no visible human movement, no ranch hands working near the house, no smoke rising from the kitchen, no clothes hanging on the line. It looked like a ghost ranch, beautiful but uninhabited. The buggy stopped in front of the house. Silas got down first and helped his wife. Evelyn stepped down alone, her legs numb after so many hours sitting. That was when the front door opened and he appeared. Frank Drummond was tall, with the broad shoulders of a man who does heavy labor, sun-weathered skin, and black hair, already showing streaks of grey at the temples, despite being only 32. He wore simple work clothes, a cotton shirt and heavy denim trousers, worn boots. His face was angular, with a 2 or 3 day stubble, but his eyes were what struck her most. They were dark, almost black, and completely empty. Eyes that looked but didn't see, that registered presence but didn't connect. He walked down the 3 steps of the porch and greeted Silas Vance with a firm handshake. "Silas," he said simply, his voice grave and raspy. The older man responded with exaggerated formality. "Frank, I brought my niece as agreed. Evelyn, come greet your groom." The word groom sounded absurd in that context. Evelyn approached, hands sweating, and Frank finally looked at her. It was a quick, analytical glance, like someone evaluating a new tool without enthusiasm. He nodded briefly. "Evelyn," he said, pronouncing her name for the first time. "Welcome." There was no warmth in his voice, no curiosity, nothing but mechanical politeness. He turned and indicated the house with a vague gesture. "I'll ask Martha to get you settled. The preacher arrives in an hour. The ceremony will be quick." And without waiting for an answer, he went inside, leaving the three standing out front. Silas seemed satisfied with the coldness of the encounter, as if it confirmed he had made the right choice. "A serious man," he commented. "He'll keep you in line." Martha appeared shortly after. She was a woman of about 55, short and plump, with a tired face but kind eyes. She led Evelyn inside, up the wooden stairs that creaked with every step, and opened the door to a room on the second floor. "This will be your room," she said softly. "There's water in the basin if you want to wash up. The wedding dress is on the bed. I'll be downstairs if you need me." Evelyn entered the room and closed the door. It was a simple but clean room, with an iron bed frame, a dark wood wardrobe, a small table with a basin and pitcher, and a window with unbleached cotton curtains. On the bed lay a white dress, not exactly a bridal gown, but a good dress, fine fabric, likely stored away for years. Evelyn touched the cloth and felt a shiver. This dress had belonged to his first wife. It had to be. She was going to get married wearing a dead woman's clothes. Her hands trembled as she took off the grey dress and put on the white one. It fit almost perfectly, just a little loose at the waist. She looked at herself in the small mirror hanging on the wall and didn't recognize the woman she saw. She looked like a bride, but her eyes were red from crying, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked more like someone going to her own funeral than to the altar. The ceremony was held in the living room, in front of the unlit fireplace. The preacher was an old, tired man who had ridden out from town. He brought the registry book and seemed anxious to finish and head back. Besides him, only Silas Vance and his wife were present as witnesses, Martha watching from a corner, and 2 ranch hands called in to fulfill the formality. Frank looked the same. He hadn't changed clothes, hadn't shaved, maintaining the neutral expression of someone fulfilling an unpleasant but necessary protocol. The preacher read the vows quickly, too fast for anyone to really follow. Then he asked if Frank took Evelyn as his wife. He answered, "I do," without looking at her. The preacher asked if Evelyn took Frank as her husband. She opened her mouth, the word "no" almost escaping, but then she saw her uncle's hard stare and murmured, "I do," so softly the preacher asked her to repeat it. "I do," she said louder, her voice cracking. The preacher declared them man and wife before God, closed the book with a dry thud, and asked both to sign the register. Evelyn signed with a trembling hand. Frank signed with firm, disinterested strokes. "Done," said the preacher. "May God bless this union." And he left quickly, like someone fleeing a wake. Silas shook Frank's hand, gave Evelyn a dry peck on the forehead, and announced it was time to head back, because the roads got dangerous at night. There were no long hugs, no loving advice, no tearful blessings. In 15 minutes, Silas's buggy was disappearing down the road, taking with it the last connections Evelyn had to her previous life. She stood on the porch, watching the dust rise from the road, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky orange and purple. She heard footsteps behind her and knew it was Frank. He stood there, a few yards away, also looking at the horizon. The silence between them was dense, heavy, full of unspoken things. Finally, he spoke. "Martha will show you the routine of the house," he said without looking at her. "I work early." I have coffee before the sun comes up and I only come back in the evening. You're free to do what you want inside the house. Just don't touch anything in my room." Evelyn turned her head to look at him. "Your room," she repeated. Frank nodded, still not facing her. "I sleep in the room next to yours. You have your space, I have mine. That was the deal." And without saying another word, he walked down the porch steps and headed toward the corrals, leaving Evelyn alone with the weight of reality. She had just married a man who didn't want her, didn't touch her, barely looked at her. A marriage that was pure punishment, without disguise, without kindness. The first night was the longest of Evelyn's life. Martha served a simple dinner in the kitchen, stew and cornbread, and tried to make conversation. She asked where Evelyn was from, if she knew the area, if she needed anything. Evelyn answered in monosyllables, the food going down dry in her tight throat. Frank didn't appear for dinner. Martha explained that he rarely dined, just ate something quick in the bunkhouse and went straight to sleep because he woke up so early. Evelyn went up to her room as soon as she finished eating. She changed out of the white dress into a simple nightgown she found in the drawer, probably left there by Martha. She lay on the bed and stared at the wooden ceiling, listening to the sounds of the ranch at night. Crickets singing, wind in the trees, a horse whinnying in the distance, and closer, much closer, the sound of boots in the hallway. Frank coming up the stairs, entering the room next door. She heard the creak of his bed, a deep sigh, and then silence. She cried again, quietly, her face buried in the pillow. She cried for the humiliation, the loneliness, the hopeless future stretching out before her. She had become a wife, but wasn't a wife. She had a house, but no home. She had a husband, but he was stranger than any passerby on the street. At 26, Evelyn Vance had died and become Evelyn Drummond, a hollow name in a living body. The first few days were about mapping territory. Evelyn woke up early, but Frank woke up even earlier. When she went down to the kitchen, he was already gone, leaving only a dirty coffee cup in the sink. Martha showed her the house routine, the cleaning, the cooking, the pantry, the chicken coop, the garden. The house was big but empty, silent as a church on a Tuesday. There were 3 rooms on the second floor, Evelyn's, Frank's, and a third that remained always shut. Martha averted her eyes when Evelyn asked about that room, answering only that it was better not to go in there. Frank returned in the late afternoon, covered in dirt and sweat, went straight to the washroom at the back of the house, scrubbed up, changed clothes, and then vanished again. Sometimes he went to the study, a small room off the parlour where his desk was piled with papers and ledgers. Other times he went back out to the barns, supervising the hands working the ranch. He avoided being in the same room as Evelyn. If she was in the parlour, he went to the kitchen. If she was in the kitchen, he went to the porch. It was a silent dance of avoidance. Evelyn tried a few times to start a conversation. One afternoon, she brewed fresh coffee and took it to the study where he was going over accounts. "Brought you some coffee," she said, placing the cup on the desk. Frank looked at the cup, then at her, and nodded. "Thanks," was all he said. She waited, thinking he would say something else, maybe comment on the weather, maybe ask how her day was. But he simply went back to looking at the papers, ignoring her presence. Evelyn left the study, her face burning with embarrassment. Another time, during a dinner, he decided to eat inside the house. Instead of the bunkhouse, she tried to ask about the ranch. "How many head of cattle do you have?" she asked, trying to sound interested. Frank chewed slowly, swallowed, and answered, 320. Silence. Evelyn tried again. "Must be a lot of work looking after all that." He took another bite of meat. "It is," he confirmed, and nothing else. The conversation died there, and the rest of the meal was accompanied only by the sound of cutlery scraping on plates. Evelyn began to explore the ranch during the day when Frank was away. She walked the grounds near the house, met the ranch hands who greeted her with respect and curiosity. They called her Ma'am, and it sounded strange to her ears because she didn't feel like the mistress of anything, least of all herself. The hands whispered among themselves. She heard the murmurs. Poor girl. Marrying Drummond must be like marrying a rock. The man doesn't speak, doesn't smile, lives like the walking dead since Amelia passed. It was Martha who, during an afternoon of embroidery on the porch, filled in the details. Evelyn had asked directly, unable to bear the curiosity any longer. Martha, what happened to his first wife? The housekeeper looked around to ensure Frank wasn't near and sighed deeply. It was a tragic thing, child, she said in a low voice. Amelia was a good girl, sweet, cheerful. She kept this house full of life. She and Frank were happy, married for love, a rare thing around here. When she got pregnant, he was wild with joy. It was going to be their first. Martha paused, her eyes tearing up. But the birth was hard, she continued. The midwife did what she could, but the baby was breached. Amelia suffered for hours and hours, and when the boy was finally born, he was already gone. She held on for another day, delirious with fever, and then she went too. Frank held her body and cried like I've never seen a man cry. After that he changed, turned into that stone you met, closed up the nursery and never opened it again. Doesn't speak of Amelia, doesn't let anyone speak of her, works until he drops from exhaustion, because I think it's the only way he can sleep. Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't exactly pity, it was something more complex, a recognition of pain. She had also lost not a beloved person, but an entire life, expectations, dreams. And just like Frank, she had become a walking ghost, fulfilling functions but not truly living. Were the two of them really so different? Both prisoners of a marriage they didn't want, him tied to the past, her tied to a present, with no choice. What happens when two living ghosts are forced to share the same roof? The question echoed in her mind as the evening fell and the shadows lengthened. It was in the third week that something changed. It wasn't a big thing, not a dramatic declaration or a romantic gesture. It was small, almost invisible, but Evelyn felt it. She had woken up earlier than usual, even before the sun rose, because she couldn't sleep properly. She went down to the kitchen, thinking of making tea, and found Frank there, standing by the wood stove, making coffee. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and for the first time really looked at her. It wasn't the quick analytical glance from before. It was a look that lasted 2, maybe 3 seconds, and there was something in it. Surprise, perhaps. Or just an acknowledgement that she existed. Up early, he said, his voice still raspy with sleep. Evelyn nodded, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders because the morning was cold. Couldn't sleep, she replied. Frank stood in silence for a moment, then took another cup from the cupboard and poured coffee for her too. He handed her the cup, and their fingers almost touched. Almost. He pulled his hand back too quickly, as if the contact burned. "It gets cold here at dawn," he said, looking at the window. "You'll get used to it." It was the longest conversation they'd had so far. Evelyn held the cup between her hands, feeling the heat seep through the porcelain and warm her frozen fingers. They stood there, the two of them standing in the still, dark kitchen, drinking coffee in silence. It wasn't a comfortable silence, but it wasn't that hostile silence of the early days anymore. It was a truce silence of two people beginning to accept each other's existence. When Frank finished his coffee, he rinsed the cup in the basin, grabbed his hat hanging on the nail by the door, and before leaving, looked at her again. "Morning," he said, and went out to the fields. Evelyn stood there, the cup still hot in her hands, her heart beating a little faster. Morning. It was just one word, but it was one word more than he had said in the 20 days prior. It was a start, tiny, fragile, but a start. She sat on the wooden chair by the table, drank the rest of her coffee slowly, and for the first time since arriving at that ranch, felt something other than despair. It was a flicker of curiosity. Who was that man really, behind the wall of silence and pain? The following days brought more of these small moments. Frank started leaving chopped wood near the back door, where Evelyn struggled to reach the big pile. He never said anything about it. New wood simply appeared every morning. Evelyn, in response, started making fresh coffee before he came down, leaving the kettle hot and his clean cup by the stove. She didn't say anything either. They were silent gestures, a language neither had agreed upon, but both were beginning to understand. One afternoon of heavy rain, Evelyn was on the porch watching the water fall when Frank returned early from the fields. He was soaked, clothes plastered to his body, hat dripping. He walked up the porch steps and stopped beside her, also looking at the rain. "Gonna last all night," he commented. "River headwaters are full. Tomorrow it'll overflow." Evelyn looked at him, seeing water run from his hair down his face. "You're soaked," she said. "You should change before you catch a cold." Frank gave something resembling a half-smile, so quick she almost missed it. "I've had worse than a cold," he replied. "But thanks for the concern." The word concern hung in the air between them. Frank went inside to change, and Evelyn stayed on the porch, her heart racing again. He had thanked her, had recognized that she cared. It was another little brick in the bridge being built between them, slowly and cautiously. When he came down again, dry and in clean clothes, she had already prepared hot soup in the kitchen. Martha had gone to visit her sister in town and wouldn't be back until the next day, so it was just the two of them in the house. They had dinner together for the first time properly. Frank ate the soup in silence, but it was a different silence. He was more relaxed, less tense. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with the napkin and said, "You cook well." Evelyn felt her face heat up. "Learned from my mother," she replied. "Before she died, she taught me everything." Frank nodded slowly. "Amelia cooked well too," he said suddenly, and then tensed up, as if he had spoken something forbidden. It was the first time he mentioned his first wife in front of Evelyn. She held her breath, afraid any movement would break the moment. "Martha told me about her," Evelyn said with a soft voice. "I'm very sorry for what happened." Frank stared at the empty plate, jaw clenched. "I don't want pity," he said, voice hard. Evelyn shook her head. "It's not pity," she clarified. "It's understanding. I've lost people too. I know how it hurts." Frank raised his eyes to hers, and there was something different there. Genuine interest, perhaps. "Who did you lose?" he asked. Evelyn took a deep breath. "My mother when I was 15. My father 3 years ago. My freedom when my uncle forced me to marry you." She said the last part without bitterness, just as a fact. Frank leaned forward slightly. "He really forced you, didn't he?" "It wasn't your choice." Evelyn let out a humorless laugh. "As little as it was your choice to accept me as a wife." The silence that followed was charged, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had finally put the truth on the table. Neither of them had chosen this. Both were prisoners of circumstance. Frank ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Evelyn was beginning to recognize as a sign he was processing something. "I accepted the marriage because I owed your uncle a favor," he said slowly, "and because the town folk wouldn't stop pressuring me to marry again. Said it wasn't healthy for a man to live alone, that I needed company. I didn't want company. I just wanted to be left in peace." Evelyn nodded. "And now you're stuck with a woman you didn't ask for and don't want." Frank looked at her, really looked, and shook his head slowly. "I didn't say I don't want," he corrected. "I said I didn't choose. Those are different things." Evelyn felt her heart skip a beat. Before she could respond, a huge thunderclap echoed outside, shaking the house. The rain intensified, hammering the roof. Frank stood up. "I'm going to check if the windows are shut tight," he said. "This storm's going to be a bad one." "Are these They spent the next hour going through the house, closing shutters, placing rags on thresholds where water leaked in, lighting lanterns because darkness had come early. They worked in sync, without needing to coordinate, him reaching the high windows, her tending to the low ones. When they finished, they were both in the parlour, the lantern light casting dancing shadows on the walls. Frank went to the fireplace and lit a fire, the flames soon crackling and warming the room. "Sit," he said, indicating the armchair near the fire. "You're shivering." Evelyn hadn't realized, but she really was, trembling, not from cold, but from something she couldn't name. She sat down, and Frank sat in the other armchair, on the other side of the hearth. They stayed there, listening to the storm outside and the crackle of the fire between them. It was Frank who broke the silence. "Do you regret it?" he asked point blank. "Marrying me?" If you're watching and enjoying this story too, leave a comment down below. I want to know what you're thinking. Evelyn thought before answering. She wanted to be honest, but also didn't want to hurt him. "I regret not having a choice," she said finally. "But I don't regret you. I don't know you well enough yet to regret it or not." Frank processed that, and then to her surprise he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a subtle curve of the lips. But it was there. "Honest," he commented. "I like that. Amelia was honest too, always said what she thought, even when I didn't want to hear it." It was the second time he spoke of his first wife, and this time with less pain in his voice. Evelyn felt it was safe to ask. "You loved her very much, didn't you?" Frank looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. "I did," he confirmed. "Married her because I wanted to, not because someone ordered it. We had plans. We're going to expand the ranch, have kids, grow old together, and in an instant it all ended." He paused, his voice getting lower. "I held my dead son in my arms. He was perfect, small, but perfect. And he was never going to open his eyes, never going to breathe. Then I held my wife and saw the life go out of her eyes. I promised to protect her, and I failed." Evelyn felt tears burn her eyes. "You didn't fail," she said firmly. "You had no control over what happened. It was a tragedy. It wasn't your fault." Frank shook his head. "In my head, I know that. But in my heart, I still feel I should have done something, anything. Should have called a doctor from the city, not just the midwife. Should have noticed the signs earlier. Should have—" He stopped, voice choked. Evelyn got up from the armchair and went to him, without thinking much. She knelt beside his chair and put her hand on his arm, touching him for the first time for real. Frank looked at her hand, then at her face. "You've carried this guilt alone for 3 years," Evelyn said softly. "Must weigh heavy." He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away from her hand either. They stayed like that for a long moment, her hand on his arm, eyes meeting in the firelight. There was something forming there, something fragile and new, something neither knew how to name yet. Then Frank covered her hand with his, just for a second, and then stood up. "It's late," he said, voice raspy. "You should rest." Evelyn nodded and stood up too. They walked up the stairs together, for the first time. In the hallway on the second floor, they stopped in front of their rooms. "Good night," said Frank. Evelyn replied good night and entered her room. But before closing the door, she heard his voice, low. "Evelyn." She turned. "Thank you," he said, "for listening." And he entered his room. Evelyn closed the door and leaned against it, heart beating hard. Something had changed that night. The wall between them had developed a crack, small but definitive. She lay in bed and, for the first time since arriving, didn't cry. Instead, she lay staring at the ceiling, thinking of the man on the other side of the wall, the brief touch of his hand on hers, the pain he carried that was so similar to her own. The following weeks were of gradual approach. Frank started coming back to dine in the house instead of eating in the bunkhouse. The conversations were still short, but they were real conversations. He asked about her day. She asked about his work. He told her about the challenges of the ranch, about the hands, about the cattle. She told him about the improvements she wanted to make in the vegetable garden, about the book she had found in the dusty house library, about the new recipes she was trying out. One afternoon, Frank arrived home with a package, handed it to Evelyn without ceremony. "Picked it up in town," he said. "Thought you might like it." Evelyn opened the package and found a book. It was a French romance translated into English, with a beautiful leather cover. She looked at him, surprised. "How did you know I liked to read?" she asked. Frank shrugged. "I see you in the library, and Martha mentioned you always liked stories. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. It was the first thing he had given her, the first gift, small but significant. Evelyn pressed the book against her chest. "Thank you," she said, voice emotional. "I will treasure it." Frank seemed uncomfortable with her gratitude, but there was a different shine in his eyes. "It's just a book," he muttered. Evelyn smiled. "No, it's not just a book, it's a gesture. And gestures matter." They started spending evenings in the parlor, each reading in an armchair by the fireplace. They didn't talk much, but each other's presence had become less strange, almost comfortable. Sometimes Evelyn read a passage aloud, and Frank commented on something. Other times Frank would lift his eyes from the ledgers and find Evelyn staring into the fire, lost in thought, and would just watch her for a few seconds before going back to work. It was Martha who noticed first. One morning, while helping Evelyn hang laundry on the line, she commented with a discreet smile. "The boss is different," she said. "Lighter. Even saw him whistling the other day. Been years since I heard him whistle." Evelyn felt her face heat up. "He's just getting used to the routine," she replied, trying to sound casual. Martha let out a low laugh. "If that's what you think, child, but I've worked here for 15 years. I know the man, and he didn't look at Amelia the way he looks at you." Evelyn dropped the sheet she was holding. "What do you mean?" she asked, heart accelerating. Martha picked up the sheet and continued hanging it. With Amelia it was a happy love, young, easy. The two were happy children playing house. With you it's different. It's the love of hurt folks learning to trust again. It's slower, more careful, but it's no less real. Evelyn stood in silence, processing that. Love? Was it love growing between her and Frank? Or was it just two lonely people clinging to each other because they had no one else? The answer came a few weeks later, when the incident with the land grabbers happened. Evelyn was in the garden picking lettuce when she heard horses approaching. She raised her head and saw 3 men entering the property. They weren't ranch hands. She knew them all. They were strangers, with dirty clothes and hard faces. One of them saw Evelyn and shouted, "Hey, Missy, where's the owner of this land?" Evelyn stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "My husband is in the fields," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" The 3 men dismounted. The one who seemed to be the leader, a tall fellow with a scar on his cheek, approached. "Your husband is Drummond?" Evelyn nodded. "That's him." The man spat on the ground. "Then tell him that this land here on the east side ain't his anymore. We got paper saying it's ours. He has a week to move his cattle off, or we'll move 'em with bullets." Evelyn felt her blood run cold. "What document is that?" she asked. "I never heard of any land sale." The man gave a crooked smile. "Wasn't a sale, little lady. Was a regularization. We went to court, proved that part wasn't in Drummond's registry, and the judge gave it to us. It's all square legal." Evelyn knew that was a lie. Frank had all the ranch documents in order. She herself had seen them when she helped him organize the study. These men were claim jumpers, opportunists who forged papers and bought corrupt judges to steal land from others. "My husband won't hand over anything without seeing these documents," said Evelyn, raising her chin. "And certainly not because of threats. I suggest you leave the property before I call the hands." The man with the scar took a step forward, invading her personal space. "You're sassy, ain't you? Think you don't understand the situation." Can call as many hands as you want. We got more people and more guns. This land's gonna be ours, one way or another." He reached out a hand as if to touch her face, and Evelyn took a step back, heart racing. That was when they heard the galloping. Frank appeared on the horizon riding his black horse, coming at full speed. Behind him, 5 ranch hands, also on horseback. Frank stopped the horse hard, jumped down in one motion, and was at Evelyn's side in 3 strides. He placed himself between her and the intruders, body tense as a fiddle string. "Get your hand away from my wife," he said with a voice dangerously low. The man with the scar stepped back, assessing the situation. Frank's hands had formed a semicircle, all armed with rifles. "Easy, Drummond," said the claim jumper, raising hands in fake peace. "We just came to give notice. That land on the east side is ours now. We got documents." Frank didn't take his eyes off the man. "I have the original deeds to this ranch from 1870. Every inch of land is documented and paid for. Whatever forged paper you have, it's worth nothing." The intruder lost the friendly pose. "The judge says it's worth it. You got a week." Frank took a step forward. "You have 10 seconds to get off my property. After that, I consider it trespassing, and I'll respond as the law allows me." The 3 men realized they were outnumbered and outpositioned. The leader spat on the ground again. "This ain't over, Drummond. We'll be back." And they mounted their horses, riding off at a gallop. When they disappeared down the road, Frank finally turned to Evelyn. "Are you all right?" he asked, hands automatically going to her shoulders, checking if she was hurt. Evelyn nodded, still trembling a bit from the adrenaline. "I'm fine. They didn't touch me." Frank pulled her into a quick, instinctive hug, then pulled away as if he'd been burned. "Sorry," he murmured. When I saw that fella near you—" Evelyn interrupted him. "No need to apologize. Thank you for coming." Frank ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture. "I was in the north pasture, and the boy came to warn me there were strange men at the main house. I never rode so fast in my life." There was something in his voice, an urgency, a fear that went beyond simple boss's concern. Evelyn touched his arm. "I'm okay," she repeated softly. "But they'll be back, won't they?" Frank nodded, jaw tight. "They will. Jumpers always come back. I'll have to go to town, speak to the marshal, check which judge they supposedly bought, and settle this in court for real. It's gonna be work." Evelyn raised her chin. "Then we'll settle it together. I can help with the documents, organize the evidence, whatever you need." Frank looked at her with something that looked like admiration. "You're not afraid?" Evelyn smiled without humor. "I am. But I won't let them steal what's yours." "What's ours?" he corrected quietly. "This ranch is yours too now." That word, ours, kept echoing. It was the first time Frank verbally acknowledged that she was part of it all, not just a dependent, but a legitimate owner of the ranch as much as he was. They spent the following days working side by side in the study, reviewing documents, preparing the defense. Frank showed Evelyn all the purchase records, the old maps, the certificates. She organized everything chronologically, made hand copies of the most important documents, prepared a clear line of argument. They worked late, sometimes until dawn, the lantern light illuminating the papers scattered on the desk. On one of these nights, Evelyn yawned without realizing, eyes stinging with fatigue. Frank looked at her. "You should sleep," he said. "It's almost 2 a.m. Evelyn shook her head. "Still need to review the documents from 1895 to 1900. Want to be sure there isn't any loophole." Frank stood up, went to her, and gently took the pen from her hand. "Evelyn, you're going to get sick. Let's continue tomorrow." She looked at him, at the tired but kind eyes, at his hand still holding hers, and felt something tighten in her chest. When had he become so important? When had his presence stopped being a weight and become a necessity? "You need to rest, too," she said. "You're working double, taking care of the ranch and this problem." Frank didn't let go of her hand. "I rest better knowing you're okay." And there was so much sincerity in his voice that Evelyn felt her eyes sting, not from tiredness, but from emotion. They went to the second floor together, climbing the stairs in silence. In the hallway, they stopped in front of their rooms as they always did. But this time, Frank didn't enter immediately. Stood there looking at her, seeming to want to say something. Evelyn waited, heart beating fast. Finally he spoke. "I know this marriage wasn't your choice. No, you were forced, that you were being punished. But He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I don't feel like it's a punishment anymore. Don't know when it changed, but it changed." Evelyn took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Changed for me too," she said softly. "I arrived here hating the situation, hating my uncle, hating my life. But I don't hate you, never hated you. And now I wake up, and the first thing I think is if you've already gone down for coffee. I spend the day waiting for you to come back from the fields. I sleep better knowing you're on the other side of the wall. Is that wrong?" Frank shook his head slowly. "No, it's not wrong, because I feel the same thing." Then they stood there, so close Evelyn could feel the heat of his body, could see every detail of his face in the dim lantern light. Frank raised his hand slowly, as if giving her time to pull back, and touched her face, calloused fingers stroking her cheek with surprising delicacy. Evelyn closed her eyes, leaning into the touch. When she opened her eyes again, Frank was closer, his gaze going from her eyes to her mouth and back. "Can I?" he asked, voice raspy. Evelyn nodded, barely able to breathe. "You can." Frank leaned in and touched his lips to hers, soft, almost shy, a kiss that was question and answer at the same time. Evelyn felt the world spin, felt years of loneliness and pain begin to dissolve in that touch. When they pulled apart, both were breathing fast. Frank rested his forehead on hers. "Good night, Evelyn," he whispered. "Good night, Frank," she replied. He went into his room, and she went into hers, but that night, for the first time, Evelyn slept with a smile on her face. The marriage that had been a punishment, that had been a sentence, was turning into something completely different. It was turning into a choice, and choosing to stay, choosing to try, choosing to open one's heart again after so much suffering was the bravest act either of them had ever done. The silent ranch was rediscovering the sound of laughter, of conversation, of hope, and the most beautiful story was just beginning to be written. The next morning brought a different clarity. Evelyn woke up with a light heart, something she hadn't felt in so long. She had forgotten what it was like. The kiss had changed everything, had knocked down the last wall between them. When she went down to the kitchen, Frank was already there, making coffee as always, but when he saw her, he smiled. It wasn't a shy or hesitant smile. It was a genuine smile that reached his eyes and lit up his whole face. "Morning," he said, and his voice had a new softness. "Morning," Evelyn replied, feeling her cheeks heat up. They drank coffee together, and this time there was no discomfort in the silence between them. It was the silence of two people who had found a safe place in each other. When Frank got up to go to the fields, he passed behind her chair and, in a bold gesture for him, kissed the top of her head. "I'll be back for lunch," he said, and left, leaving Evelyn with a racing heart and a silly smile on her face. Martha entered the kitchen minutes later and found Evelyn still sitting, looking at the empty cup with a dreamy expression. The housekeeper crossed her arms and smiled. "So it happened," she commented with satisfaction. Evelyn looked at her, feigning innocence. "What happened?" Martha laughed. "Child, I have eyes. The boss left here whistling, and you're sitting there looking like you won the lottery. Finally, you two stopped pretending you weren't falling in love." "Falling in love?" The words kept echoing in Evelyn's head. Was that it? Was it love growing between her and Frank? She was sure it was. It wasn't the explosive love of the romantic stories she read in books. It wasn't a sweeping and dramatic passion. It was something deeper, more solid. It was love built brick by brick, through small gestures, night conversations, shared vulnerability. It was the love of two wounded people deciding to heal together. The following days were the happiest Evelyn had lived since arriving at the ranch. Frank opened up completely. He told stories from his childhood, showed her his favorite places on the property, taught her to ride better, introduced her to the hands differently, with visible pride in his voice. "Look, this is my wife, Evelyn," he would say, and the word wife now had real meaning. The hands noticed the change and started treating Evelyn with genuine respect, not just protocol. Evelyn started making changes to the house. She opened the curtains that were always closed, letting sunlight in. Put fresh flowers in every room, convinced Frank to fix the old piano sitting in the parlor. She knew how to play, had learned from her mother, and when the first chords rang through the house, Frank stopped in the parlor doorway, eyes tearing up. "Been years since there was music here," he said with a choked voice. "I'd forgotten what a difference it makes." They danced that night, right there in the parlor, with no music other than what Evelyn hummed softly. Frank held her carefully, as if she were something precious that could break. They spun slowly, and Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat through his shirt. "I never thought I'd be happy here," she confessed. "When I arrived, I just wanted to die." Frank held her closer. "I know," he whispered. "I felt that way too, dead inside, but you brought me back. Don't know how, but you did." Evelyn raised her face to look at him. "You brought me back too. Gave me a home when I thought I'd never have one. Gave me respect when the whole world treated me like a burden. Gave me love when I thought I didn't deserve it." Frank held her face between his hands. "You deserve everything good that exists, Evelyn, everything, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to give you that." And he kissed her, deeper this time, and Evelyn felt her whole soul light up. But the happiness was interrupted a week later when the land grabbers returned. This time they didn't come by day, didn't come to warn. They came by night, sneaky, with torches and bad intentions. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke, jumped out of bed, ran to the window and saw fire in the east pasture, exactly the area the grabbers wanted to take. They were burning the grass, destroying the grazing land, killing the cattle that couldn't escape in time. "Frank!" she screamed, running to the room next door. "Fire!" Frank was already waking up, had smelled the smoke too. He dressed in seconds, ran down the stairs, and Evelyn followed. He shouted to the hands sleeping in the bunkhouse, and in minutes everyone was awake, saddling horses, grabbing buckets, organizing to fight the blaze. Frank turned to Evelyn. "You stay here," he ordered. "No," she replied firmly. "I'm going to help. It's my ranch too, you said so yourself." Frank didn't have time to argue. He nodded, handed her a wet bandana to tie around her face. "Don't leave my side," he said. "Promise." "I promise," she replied. They galloped together to the burning pasture. The scene was hellish. Fire spreading fast with the wind, cattle lowing in panic, smoke rising black and dense against the starry sky. The hands were already trying to control the flames, some digging fire breaks, cutting vegetation to stop the fire from advancing, others throwing water from buckets, which was little, far too little. Evelyn worked alongside everyone, filling buckets in the nearby creek, passing them hand to hand, smoke burning her eyes and throat. Frank was on the front line, beating the fire with wet branches, shouting orders, coordinating the efforts. It was hours of struggle, hours of desperation, until finally, when the sun began to rise, the fire was controlled. It had destroyed nearly 20 acres of pasture, had killed 12 head of cattle, but it could have been much worse. Everyone was exhausted, covered in soot and ash. Frank inspected the damage with a closed face. Evelyn approached, touching his arm. It was them, wasn't it? It wasn't a question. Frank nodded, jaw tight. It was. This is a crime. It's not just claim jumping anymore. It's destruction of property, arson. Now they're really screwed. I'm going to town this very day, going to talk to the marshal, the prosecutor, whoever is necessary. Evelyn held his hand. I'm going with you. Two voices are stronger than one. They went to town together that same morning, exhausted but determined. At the county clerk's office, they got certified copies of all ranch records. At the courthouse, they spoke with the district attorney, a serious man named Mr. Henry, who listened to the story with growing attention. When Frank finished relating everything, including the previous night's fire, the prosecutor hit the table. This is intolerable, he said. These claimed jumpers have acted with impunity for too long. I will request an immediate arrest warrant and a full investigation. If they really bought a judge, I will find out who it was, and he will pay too. Evelyn presented all the documentation she had organized, clear and methodical. The prosecutor was impressed. You did excellent work, ma'am, he commented. With this evidence, they stand no chance in court. Frank looked at Evelyn with visible pride. My wife is a very capable woman, he said, voice full of admiration. The prosecutor smiled. I see that. You make a good team. The investigation was swift and ruthless. The prosecutor discovered that a corrupt judge from the neighboring county had indeed issued a false document favoring the grabbers in exchange for money. The judge was removed and indicted. The three land grabbers were arrested in the act when trying to flee the region. At the trial, which happened 6 weeks later, all were sentenced to years in prison for fraud, arson, and corruption. The lands of Stone Creek Ranch were officially recognized as legitimate, without any question. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to comment down below what you thought. When they returned from town with the news of the final victory, Frank stopped the buggy in the middle of the road before reaching the ranch. Evelyn looked at him, confused. What is it? Frank turned to her, took her hands in his. I need to say something, he began. When this marriage was arranged, I accepted because I felt obligated. Didn't want a wife, didn't want company, didn't want anything other than to be left in peace with my pain. You arrived here and I treated you poorly, ignored you, avoided you, made you feel like a burden. And I apologize for that. Evelyn squeezed his hands. You don't need to apologize. I understand why you were like that. Frank shook his head. I do, because you deserved better from the start. But I was so lost in my own pain, I couldn't see you were suffering too. He took a deep breath. But now I see you, Evelyn, see your strength, your intelligence, your kindness. See how you transformed this ranch, transformed my life, transformed me, and I don't want to pretend anymore that this is just a marriage of convenience. Tears began to run down Evelyn's face. Frank continued, voice emotional. I love you, Evelyn. I love the woman you are, love your courage, love how you face things head on, love how you play the piano, love how you tend the garden, love how you look at me. And I know this isn't the kind of marriage you dreamed of as a girl. There was no romantic courting, no free choice. But if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life making it worth it. I'll love you every day, the way you deserve to be loved. Do you accept that? Accept giving me a real chance? Evelyn was crying openly now, but it was happy crying. She pulled Frank closer and held his face between her hands. You fool, she said with a trembling voice. I already gave you the chance. I already chose you. I love you too, Frank. I've loved you since that night in the storm when you held my hand. I love you when you wake up before the sun and leave coffee ready for me. I love you when you come back from the fields smelling of earth and sweat. I love you when you smile, which is rare but beautiful. I love you broken. I love you healed. I love you the way you are. Frank kissed her right there, in the middle of the road, under the late afternoon sun. and it was the truest kiss either of them had ever given. When they separated, both were smiling through the tears. "Let's go home," said Frank. "Our home, our ranch, our life." And they continued on their way, hands intertwined, hearts finally complete. The months that followed were of complete transformation. Stone Creek Ranch was reborn. Evelyn took an active role in administration, handling the accounts and organization that Frank detested. She was good with numbers, had an eye for waste and opportunities, suggested raising chickens on a larger scale to sell eggs in town, and it worked. Proposed planting a commercial vegetable garden, not just for their own consumption, and it also turned a profit. Frank listened to her ideas with attention and respect, implemented the ones that made sense, and the ranch began to prosper even more. But more important than financial success was emotional success. The house that had been a mausoleum of grief turned into a home full of life. Evelyn convinced Frank to open the room that stayed closed, the room that had been prepared for the baby that never was. He resisted at first, but she was patient. "Let's turn this room into something new," she suggested, "not to forget the past, but to honor it and move forward." Frank agreed, with tears in his eyes. Together they turned the room into a library, painted the walls a light color, put up shelves Frank built with his own hands, filled it with books. Evelyn placed a comfortable armchair near the window with good light for reading. Frank hung a small frame on the wall with the names they had chosen for the son, Peter August. "Always going to be part of our history," he said in a low voice, "but won't be just pain anymore, will be memory with love." Evelyn hugged him, and they stood there, the two of them, healing together wounds they had previously carried alone. The community also noticed the change. Evelyn convinced Frank to start receiving visitors again, to participate in town events. At first, he was reluctant, but she was by his side, and with her there, it was easier. They went to Sunday service, something Frank hadn't done for 3 years. People looked surprised, and even more surprised to see Frank and Evelyn holding hands, smiling at each other. The gossip changed its tune. Before they said, "Poor girl, marrying Drummond must be hell." Now they said, "Looks like true love really works miracles. Look how happy they are." Martha, witness to it all, commented one afternoon while they drank tea on the porch. "I've seen many things in this life," she said, watching the couple working together in the garden, laughing at something, "but never seen a transformation so beautiful. You two arrived here dead, and now you're more alive than anyone." Evelyn smiled. "Sometimes we need to die a little to be reborn better," she replied, "and sometimes need to find the right person who dies and is reborn with us." Their first winter together was particularly special. On cold nights, they stayed near the fireplace, Evelyn reading while Frank worked on some carpentry project he had started as a hobby. He was making new furniture for the house, each piece made with care and dedication. Made a new table for the kitchen, rocking chairs for the porch, a delicate music box for Evelyn to keep jewelry she didn't have, but that he was planning to give her. On one of those nights, while snow began to fall outside, Frank stopped working and looked at Evelyn. "Are you happy?" he asked suddenly. Evelyn raised her eyes from the book. "I am," she replied without hesitating, "happier than I ever imagined I'd be. And you?" Frank put the tool aside and went to her, kneeling beside the armchair. "I'm happier than I deserve to be," he said. "You gave me a second chance at life, at love, at everything. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I give thanks every day." Evelyn stroked his face. "You didn't need to do anything to deserve love, Frank. Love isn't a reward for merit. It's a gift we give freely. And I choose to give you my love every day because you are the kindest, most honest, strongest man I know, and because you chose me too, even when you weren't obligated." Frank rested his head in her lap, and Evelyn ran her fingers through his hair, and they stayed like that, in complete peace, while the snow fell outside, painting the world white. Years passed. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming a benchmark in the region. Other ranchers came to ask for advice, especially about the innovations Evelyn had implemented. She became a respected figure, not just as Drummond's wife, but as a capable administrator in her own right. Frank had immense pride in her, never missed an opportunity to praise his wife's intelligence and work. They faced challenges, as everyone does. There were drought years, plague years, years of low cattle prices. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. When one lost heart, the other lifted them up. When one was afraid, the other gave courage. They were partners in the truest sense of the word, sharing not just the bed and the house, but the dreams, the fears, the plans, the victories and the defeats. 5 years after the wedding, on a spring afternoon, Evelyn was on the porch watching Frank work with the new horses they had bought. Martha sat beside her with 2 glasses of fresh lemonade. "You realize, don't you," said the housekeeper with a wise smile, "that the story of you two is told all over the region?" Evelyn looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" Martha laughed. "People talk, child. They tell of the marriage that was a punishment and turned into true love, about the girl forced to marry the reclusive widower and ended up saving him from the darkness, about the man who thought he'd never love again and discovered the heart can heal and love anew." Evelyn felt her eyes tear up. "It wasn't just me who saved him," she said softly. "He saved me too. We saved each other." Martha nodded. "Exactly. And that's why the story is so beautiful. Because it isn't about a prince saving a princess, or a princess saving a prince. It's about 2 broken people who fixed themselves together. It's about choosing to love even when the start was forced. It's about turning a curse into a blessing through courage and patience. The girls in town sigh when they hear it. The boys learn that true love isn't just passion, it's also partnership. The older couples remember it's never too late to start over. At that moment, Frank looked toward the porch and saw Evelyn there. He smiled, that smile that now came easily, and waved. Evelyn waved back, heart overflowing. 5 years ago, she had arrived at that ranch like a convict, a walking punishment, without hope and without a future. And now she was there, happy, fulfilled, loved and loving. Life had a strange sense of humor sometimes, turning the worst things into the best. More years passed. Stone Creek Ranch became legendary, not just for its success, but for the love one could feel in the air. Visitors commented there was something special about that property, a peace, a joy that was contagious. The hands worked happily because the bosses were fair and kind. The animals were well cared for because Frank and Evelyn believed dignified treatment resulted in better products. The land blossomed because it was cultivated with care and knowledge. On an autumn afternoon, 10 years after the wedding, Frank and Evelyn were sitting on the new porch he had built, bigger and prettier than the previous one. They were holding hands, watching the sunset painting the sky orange and purple. "Do you remember the day you arrived here?" asked Frank. Evelyn squeezed his hand. "Remember it like it was yesterday. I was terrified, feeling like my life had ended." Frank brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "And now?" Evelyn smiled. "Now I know it hadn't ended. It had only truly begun. Sometimes what looks like the end is just a bend in the road leading to a much better place." Frank pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I wouldn't change a thing," he said. "Not the way it started, not the suffering, not the pain. Because all that brought us here, to this moment, together." Evelyn agreed. "I wouldn't change it either, because I learned that true love doesn't need a perfect beginning. It needs 2 people willing to build something good together, even when circumstances are bad. It needs daily choice, patience, forgiveness, hope. And we had all that." The ranch continued its routine. Seasons changed. Life followed its natural course. Frank and Evelyn grew old together side by side, facing every challenge as a team, celebrating every victory as a shared achievement. Their hair grey, hands marked by work, but eyes still shining with the same love that had been born of that storm, of that night when two wounded strangers began to know each other for real. Their story was told and retold in the region, passing from generation to generation, became an example, became inspiration, became living proof that destiny can be transformed when you have courage. Became a legend about how the marriage that was meant to be a punishment transformed into the most beautiful love story those lands had ever seen. And when people asked what the secret was, what the magic was, Frank and Evelyn always answered the same thing. There is no magic. There is choice. We choose every day to wake up and love, even when it's hard. We choose to see the best in each other, even when the worst appears. We choose to build together instead of destroying alone. We choose to turn pain into strength, punishment into a gift, obligation into devotion. And those choices, day after day, year after year, built something stronger than any initial passion, something deeper than any fairy tale. Built true love, the kind that lasts, the kind that transforms, the kind that is worth every tear shed along the way. The sun set completely, and night arrived softly over Stone Creek Ranch. But inside the house, the lights were on. There was music playing on the piano, there was the smell of dinner being prepared, there were voices talking and laughing, there was life, abundant and happy life. And on the porch, two figures remained seated, holding hands, watching the stars appear one by one in the dark sky. They didn't need words. Each other's presence said everything. And so they stayed, while the world turned, while time passed, while their story continued being written, page after page of love built, chosen, kept. The punishment had turned into a blessing. The sentence had turned into freedom. The stranger had turned into the beloved, and the silent ranch had turned into a home. Not by magic, not by luck, but by two people who decided it was worth trying, worth believing, worth loving. And that, in the end, made all the difference. The story of Evelyn and Frank proved that it is never too late to start over, that love can be born from the ashes of pain, that the worst beginnings can lead to the best destinations, proved that we are stronger together than apart, that shared vulnerability is the purest form of courage, that choosing to stay when you can leave is the most powerful decision someone can make. And years later, when the elders of the town told this story to the younger ones, they always ended the same way, and they lived happily, not because it was easy, but because they made it worth it. Because they transformed the marriage that was a punishment into the most beautiful love story that ranch, that region, that piece of Montana ground had ever witnessed. And that story, told and retold, warmed the hearts of all who heard it, gave hope to the hopeless, gave courage to the fearful, gave faith to the unbelievers. Because if Evelyn and Frank managed to find love where there was only obligation, maybe we can all find light where we only see darkness. Maybe we can all transform our punishments into gifts if we have the courage to try.